Hey everyone, my name is Eric Bahn, and I'm one of the co-founders at Hustle Fund, which is an early stage venture capital firm. Welcome to today's session, which is about how to organize a simple CRM for your fundraise process. So if you've ever been on the internet before, you'll notice that there is no lack of advice on how to create the perfect pitch. I mean, even Hustle Fund at this point has probably over a dozen videos on this topic alone. If you search our YouTube channel, by the way, you should do that. So I lead fundraising at Hustle Fund, and having raised well over $70 million so far for the fund alone, I've come down to a simple set of truths. Yes, pitching really does matter, but I think that great organization and follow-up matters even more. And that is what we're going to talk about. And this is where a lot of founders screw up, including myself from back in the day. Today, we're going to be focusing on this critical and unsexy part of fundraising, which is the art of organization and follow-up. And I swear that this is going to be a session that you'll not regret joining. So let's go ahead and take a look at the agenda. So we'll start with just we're not so much time of first bullet. Let's talk about why we care about this topic. I'll actually walk you through an example of a simple CRM based on a Google sheet that I built, and then you can actually copy and use for your own purposes, for your own fundraising. And then we're going to have some Q&A at the very end. So the way that this all works, we're in a Zoom webinar right now. I'm joined by my producer, Hung, and also my other colleague, Janelle, who's going to be coming back a little bit later this session. So please put your questions throughout the session in the Q&A area of this Zoom webinar, not the chat. It's gonna be a little bit too hard for us to monitor the chat, but definitely use the chat. You can, per usual, make fun of my garage or me, or even better is to maybe share where you're based and what you're working on. That's always fun to see what's the people in this community. So I have roughly about 25 minutes of things that I wanna say. And then we'll try to leave the majority of our time, a little bit over half of our time this session, to answer your questions directly. And we'll have Janelle come back for that. All right. So before we jump in, I just wanted to share this shout out. Today's event is possible because of a great partnership that we have with GS Futures. And I'd like to share a little bit about what GS Futures is up to. GS Futures is a multi-stage VC fund celebrating its 1-year anniversary, investing into teams at the seed stage all the way through Series D. This team is a spinoff from the GS Group in Korea, which is a legendary enterprise representing assets in retail, consumer, energy, and much more. GS Futures is actively seeking and investing in great hustlers, accelerating energy transition, climate tech, construction tech, and future of commerce. Go to their website right now and tell them what you're up to. We think that you'll be excited to partner with them. You can learn more at gsfutures.vc. Big shouts. Thank you so much, GS Futures, for today's session. All right, let's get into the content here. I raised a lot of money. That's about it. So why are we talking about CRMs? Right? When I was preparing this slide, I was trying to think of some terms that came to mind when it came to my own fundraising experiences. And I typed in war of attrition. And I took this picture from Google from William Philpott's book, Attrition. I just thought that this grisly World War I soldier was a really good metaphor for this. And then I took another picture from ABC Television's Family Matters, one of my favorite cultural icons from the 90s, Steve Urkel, right? So what do they both have in common? Well, they had a big task in mind. At one point it was war, another was, in the case of Steve Urkel, winning Laura Winslow's heart. And the way that I guess ultimately these battles were fought was via attrition. So I want to take a quick pause and say that, today, if you're reading TechCrunch or some of the other tech press news, it seems like money is just flying everywhere based on those reports. That, if you're a founder that has a pulse and you just show up in front of an investor, that money is just going to be given to you. At least that's the narrative of this frothiness that we're hearing in the market. But I'm going to just say unequivocally that fundraising is always hard. It doesn't matter whether you are in a bull cycle or a bust cycle, as a founder, you should just assume that this is going to be a very difficult process. And also, to be honest with you too, if you're an underrepresented founder, a woman, a person that's in a geography that's well outside some of the coastal cities of the United States, those are going to be things that make this difficult too, because of implicit bias. And there's plenty of it in venture capital, and we can sort of talk about that a little bit later. So the way that I philosophically think about fundraising when I go ahead and do it is yes, like, I have my pitch deck and I spend lots of time developing that. But I think that this is going to be won through brute force. In our first fund, which was $11.5 million that we raised in 2017, we pitched over 600 investors in order to get about 60 or 70 to say yes to us. So that was a lot of people saying no. And we took checks as small as $10,000 for that $11.5 million venture fund that we first raised. And we said, we're just going to just grit through it to get it done. So especially for those of you who are going through your first raises, either as a pre-seed or angel kind of round, don't assume necessarily that'll come together very fast. It might, but if you're lucky, and that's awesome if it does, but this is going to be a Steve Urkel kind of exercise where you're going to have to just wear people down. Do people remember that? I'm wearing it down. I'm wearing it down. That's what he said. All right. You guys should watch more Family Matters. Okay, so let's talk about some of the basic elements of the CRM. So I think that people overthink this a lot. They want to create all these kinds of different stages and fields and all this stuff, but I'm going to show you an example of something that's really simple that can get you through several rounds of fundraising, even ones that are, very advanced where you're trying to raise $50 or $100 million at a time. It could be a spreadsheet, and I'll show you what one looks like. For me, the most important part of a great CRM is actually the activities and reminders, understanding whom you're supposed to talk to every day. When I'm in fundraising mode, I just go into my CRM and I see what are the 12 people I'm supposed to reach out to today, and I just knock them out and then go on to the rest of my day. Sometimes it's a simple message just saying like, hey, Hung, just want to get your thoughts. That's it, and knock it out, and then come back to the rest of my activities. We'll talk through some examples soon. The note-taking aspects are also really important because you may be fundraising as a team, and sometimes little things happen where Janelle's talking to an investor, I'm talking to the same investor, and the right hand and left hand aren't really speaking to each other. I also think that CRMs are very important because this might actually be how you organize your own investor newsletter. We have a big session actually on fundraising based on your newsletter activities. You can search for that on the Hustle Fund YouTube channel. It's a pretty important one. I think one of the best levers for fundraising. We can talk more about that in a little bit. And if you actually do move on from a spreadsheet and use a real CRM like HubSpot or Pipedrive or Salesforce, whatever it is, I like the stalking aspects of CRM too, where you can see the opens, like how many people are opening your email, how many people are clicking through and all that stuff. And sometimes that provides some advanced clues in terms of the interest that your prospective investors have about investing in your company. We're not going to really talk about that last one today, although we can address it in the Q&A if there's some interest. So once again, if you have some interest in understanding some of our past fundraising related content, just search for us on YouTube. We have a lot of videos there, several dozen at this point. Almost all of it's about fundraising. Okay, so what I want to do next is actually switch over and share a different view, which is our fundraising spreadsheet. And we're going to go through a couple exercises here as a group. So I created this for you. You can go to bit.ly/simple-fundraise-CRM. This is meant for you to come and visit. You can view it in real time as I'm actually messing around with the CRM myself. Copy and paste it for your own needs. All right, this is an artifact for you to enjoy as well. So let me go ahead and stop sharing this one and start sharing the other one. So let's share this other view here. Safari, share. Okay. Hopefully at this point, you can see a very simple spreadsheet here. And it's got a lot of tiny text here, but let me go ahead and zoom to make this a little bit easier for you to read with me. So let's take a look at the different elements of this simple CRM. Again, if you want to do this through Google Sheets, that's great. Normally, I like to do this on Airtable. Airtable is actually our like database tool that we really like at Hustle Fund, but I tend to find that it's not as well penetrated in terms of the masses yet versus just copying a Google Sheet. So feel free to permutate this as much as you want on any tool you like. So I'm going to go column by column, and then let's go through a couple examples of how I'd actually use this. All right. So the first is this, which is the name, pretty straightforward. What is the name of the firm or the person that you're trying to target? Their contact information here is the email. The type of investor. This one's kind of important for me when I do my work. So I have some pull downs here, some different categories like angel, venture fund, family office, corporate, others. If you run venture funds, sometimes it's important to actually add different kinds of parameters like qualified purchaser, qualified client, accredited investor. In the case of those who raise venture capital funds like myself, like having a different kind of understanding of each different type of investor sometimes helps you figure out who to prioritize and letting into your investment round and so forth. These kinds of terms, by the way, are a little bit less important for companies that are trying to raise capital today. Okay, this one's a big one, the referrer. This I'm on column D right here. I think this is the most important part of the entire activity when you're putting together your investor list is whom are you going to talk to get the referral, right? Now, there's certain funds like Hustle Fund, for example, where it's totally cool to reach out to us cold. Just go to hustlefund.vc, click on the what are you hustling button. And actually some of our very best companies in our history have happened because of cold intros, just people reaching out to us. So we encourage it. More VC funds are starting to act that way too. But that said, I would say that warm introductions are still the norm in terms of getting the best kinds of response rates for your intended target. So the way that I would do this is I would try to see like, okay, I'm trying to reach out to Hung Pham. He's like an investor at Hustle Fund. I would go on LinkedIn, look him up and see whether there are any second degree connections between me and him. So whomever you have that is like the warmest connection, reach out to them, see whether they'd be open to introducing to Hung, and then put that person's name down as the referrer. This takes time. Okay, this is actually the most time consuming part, but if you do it well and you can line up all of your referrers, then when you are ready to do your outreach, the response rate will be a little bit higher in my view. Okay, so I didn't want to overdo this, but I do have different kinds of stages as well that I think is pretty important to document. So these are the stages that I set up. There's the lead. These are the people that you think could be a prospective LP. You've done nothing to reach out to them, whatever. First contact. That's usually when the referrer has sent over your blurb saying like, "Hey, do you want to talk to Eric?" Or maybe you've done your cold outreach. The first pitch is when you actually get on the phone or Zoom with that person to deliver that contact. Deliver your content, deliver your pitch. It's a little bit. I tend to find that maybe it's a little bit redundant, but sometimes it's kind of nice to know. Due diligence is usually the stage that happens after the first pitch, which is, okay, and if they didn't reject you on the spot, they want to dig in a little bit, maybe see a little bit more of your materials, talk to some of your clients or other kinds of references. That's the due diligence period. Due diligence period. And then soft commit is when you get a verbal saying like, okay, this is good. I'm in for $50,000, right? Nothing is signed yet. It's a verbal. Don't confuse verbal commits for hard commits because I tend to find that they don't always convert. So a quick tip here is like, if you're trying to raise, let's say $10 million, just to give you some, that's too much. Let's say you're trying to raise $500,000, right? For your first tranche of capital. I would actually try to get soft commitments of about $550,000 or $600,000 because there's usually a little bit of that drop off. Signed, however, is a hard commit. You sent them the safe, hopefully through DocuSign or something, or HelloSign or one of those kinds of tools. Both parties have signed and it's right there. Money's being wired. And then I have these two kind of failure modes, which is rejected, which is like Hung saying, hell no, Eric, go away. I never will invest in you. Or ghosted is another really interesting one, which is one you should really expect, which is I gave the pitch, I reached out to the person, everything is going great, and you never hear from that person ever again. If you looked at some of our previous sessions with regard to fundraising, ghosting is not necessarily a no, right? It's not a no until people have definitely said no. So for those who ghost, I view it as fair game for you to continue reaching out to them to try to convince them to raise capital. To just give you a sense of how persistent we are at Hustle Fund about this, there have been people who have been ghosting me for 4 years. I went through the pitch, and then I've been sending them a note for every month for the last 4 years. And I will continue to do that until they explicitly tell me to go away. Right. So no is not, a ghost is not a no. And then there's a commitment amount, of course. So, usually around like the soft commit phase, the verbal commit phase, I like to see, how much money has been committed by that. I created this nice little formula here. I'm not sure if you can see that. It's not that important. That allows you to track, your verbal commitments. So if I add like something else here, like $50,000, for example, you can see that went up by $200,000 or 100,000. Yeah, pretty neat, right? Notes. So I'll walk you through example here, but of course, like this is a great area to like share whatever your discussions were, your interactions, to make sure that your team, if software people are looking at this, are up to date in terms of where you are at with some of the color of each of these stages. And then closed. So again, kind of similar to this, which is like after you've fully signed off, the safe, you put in the amount there, boom, got it, right? 100,000, the numbers change and so forth. And then next contact. So this one is super duper critical. For me, this is actually what I look for every day when I actually do my fundraising, because I want to see like, what am I supposed to do today or in the future to deal with this prospective investor. All right, so let's go back here and actually do some examples here. So I'll share an example. What I would do first is make sure that I sort this next contact sheet. Actually, I'm going to zoom back so that you can see this fit or 100%. Okay, extend this a bit. All right, so let's do a sheet here. A little A to Z action there. Okay. So, okay, today is 10:25, and I see these activities here. So it's let me zoom back in because it's a bit annoying for you to see. So I got these 4 people, it looks like, that I need to talk to, right? So what I do every morning when I'm fundraising, at least, is I log into my CRM, and then I just see who do I need to contact next. And then I see, okay, like I got Hippo Angel here. And this is referred by Janine Hippo Botherton. What a great name. And then she's in the due diligence stage. So because I know that this person's in the due diligence stage, usually I'll write a message saying like, okay, hey, it's been about a week since we last spoke, Angel. Any new thoughts or questions? And then I'll document that, which is just like, okay, 10, 25, 21, reached out to Angel, asked about new questions or thoughts. That's it, right? It's very, very simple. And then I'll then like mark the next contact to be like, okay, I think like I want to actually reach out to this person in 1 week. So 1 week from today is November 1st. And then I do that again with the next person, which is just, okay, this is a new lead. So what I will do here is say like, okay, today is 10/25/21, asked Hung to forward my investor blurb to this Angel. Hung confirmed he has sent, right? So, or actually, yeah. So then again, like I usually kind of think in terms of like usually 2 to 3 days as well as a week. So in this case, like when it's like a lead, I usually like to follow up in like 2 days to get to the first pitch every 2 days. And then like after I've delivered my first pitch, I'll reach out every week at that point. So that's it. I mean, you just keep going down this list and then, update the stage, make sure that the dates are there. It's meant to be pretty simple stuff. So again, like the key here is, if I were to do like a fundraise process from scratch on like $500,000, like my very, very first tranche of capital, what I would do is actually try to target probably 70 to 100 names here. It sounds like a lot because it is. And also this assumes that you are also into just like brute forcing your capital raises like we have. Now, you may want to target some venture capital firms. That's great. You may also want to target some angels, but also you may also find that it's going to be better for you to talk to anyone who is accredited. In our very first fund, we actually really pitched a wide diaspora of folks. At one point, my co-founder, Elizabeth, was sitting in her optometry appointments, pitching her optometrist. In fact, we pitched that optometrist 2 times on Fund 1 as well as for Fund 2. And the optometrist actually said no to us both times. So that was kind of annoying, but we'll get them for Fund 3 or Fund 4 at some point. Maybe there's some eye benefits too, if we can do that. But this idea is just like anyone who's an accredited investor is in play when it comes to being an angel investor. And an accredited investor is a very simple definition here in the United States, at least, is anyone who has earned $200,000 or more of income over the course of annual income over the course of 2 years. If you're a couple, that's $300,000 of combined income over 2 years sustained, or has a liquid net worth, investable assets of over $1 million. So that will also include a lot of doctors, lawyers, nurses, in some cases, people who are in the trades like plumbers, electricians. Everyone can be an angel investor here. And I would leave room for some of those folks too to potentially pitch. Okay. So the idea behind this was, just to kind of give you an overview of how I think about organizing CRMs. And I want to actually leave plenty of time in this session actually to get to your questions as well. So this can be a little bit more expansive. I'd love to see questions that are more oriented towards organizing your fundraise. But if you have some questions about the fundraise in general, that's going to be, we can use the rest of this time to sort of talk through that too. And in order to do that, I'd actually like to invite, my colleague Janelle, who's back in here. Janelle, I'm not sure whether there's some good questions popping in. Janelle, are there some questions from the Q&A that you see?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks everyone for all the great questions. As a reminder, if you have questions, we've got, 35 minutes or so remaining so that we can talk through all of your wonderings with Eric. So Eric, let's dive in with this first question. So we're all talking, you started off by talking about how the referral column in the CRM is so important. And this question came up: if you do not have any warm connections, how do you develop a relationship with that potential investor? And how do you do it in your first outreach? So do you mention past investments? Do you mention your fund strategy? What do you think about that?
Yeah. So this is a tough position, and I actually have a lot of empathy for founders who are here because I've actually been in this situation myself. In my first company, I didn't have too much of a network towards investors, so everything felt like it was super cold. So sometimes you have no choice but to reach out directly. And there's a good way of doing this, and there's a bad way of doing this. So if you do a cold outreach, I'd say that if it's really generic of like, hey, can I get 15 minutes of your time to talk about this opportunity? That's horrific. Never do that because it feels really, really lazy on the part of the person that's receiving that kind of a message. If you did a little bit of homework and say like, hey, like Eric, I see that you spent like 9 years in education tech as a founder, and just want to share, like, I'm working on something really cool in the ed tech space as well that I think could be a really strong fit for like Hustle Fund's thesis of like serving great hustlers. Like a little bit of that research, I think, can go a long way to, I think, dramatically increase the likelihood that someone's going to take a look at your cold outreach. Now, I think there are some warming strategies here. Okay, so the other is, there's sort of two I can sort of think of right now. One that is more reasonable, the other which is a little bit nuts. So here are the two ideas. The first is this, which is if you have a little bit of time before your fundraise begins, it doesn't hurt to try to develop a little bit of a relationship with that investor or set of investors via Twitter. VC Twitter and investor Twitter is actually quite powerful. And you start to notice the same kind of people who are replying, kind of trying to engage you after a while. So it feels a lot less cold. And maybe you can get to the point where like you're DMing a little bit with that investor prior to actually sharing your pitch with them. So that's good. And that is actually something that's available to all, which is the chance to build a little bit of Twitter presence, but also Twitter engagement in anticipation for a meeting. Here's like a strategy that we talk to a lot of our founders about with regard to sales and customer acquisition just generally, which I think works very well in the case of attractor investing interest too. But it's a little bit crazy and it requires you to have a long lead up time. So if I were to reach out to Janelle and then she's an investor and say like, Janelle, I got this great opportunity for you. I want to get 15 minutes of your time. Like we already talked about that being like a horrific way of doing that, of trying to get her attention. But a different method would be like, Janelle, you're a great investor, and I'd love to have you on my podcast. It's then where I'm interviewing like people on like the future of something, education tech, or possibly just like new entrants in the VC space, all that stuff. I'm not saying that you should just create a podcast for the hell of it, just because of fundraising. Like ideally, this is something that supports your business. Else, that's actually not a really great use of your time. But there's a big difference, I think, in terms of response rate when you're inviting someone to, to feature them in media or content or podcast or newsletter, whatever it's going to be. Why this works, I think, especially well, by the way, in the sales use case, is like if you're trying to reach a whale, which is like, the CEO of like Levi's, Strauss or something, if you're in like the fashion tech space or something, you can feature them, make them look really good in your podcast. And then you do the follow-up, which is like, by the way, like I'm working on this really cool company. Can we chat about that too? And it just feels rude at that point for the guest to say no, because you already like have sunk cost of investment into the relationship. So this is a strategy to think about, which is like, if there's a media aspect to the work that you do and you want to invite some investors who are relevant to this space to be featured in your newsletter or podcast or whatever, I think that's actually a really solid way to go. Now, that said, you can't really condense this in like a month right before your fundraise. This is something that, could happen in parallel. So a couple ideas there in terms of how you can think about doing outreach when you're kind of new to building your network.
And Eric, this goes in hand with a question someone else asked. So maybe that's your strategy for a whale, but how do you tailor your outreach depending on what type of investor that you're reaching out to? The angel versus the larger scale investor.
Yeah. So there's sort of a right way to do this, and then there's a lazy way. And I kind of do the lazy way. So the right way is like you do your research on LinkedIn and Googling, just doing your online stalking, try to understand like how you can craft a 4-wordable blurb for that person in particular. So an example is like if Hung can be the referrer to Janelle, and you actually say like, Hung, can you actually forward this blurb specifically? It's about my company, but maybe I can highlight things like, oh, you're a US cyclist, Janelle, and like, I love riding bikes too. Like something that's a little more crafted to the intended target. It's a lot of work, but I'm always impressed by the very few founders who actually pull this off, because it shows a lot of care and hustle to pull this off well. That's one way of doing that. So, but here's like the lazy way that I do it. Okay. And it's a little bit plays into psychology here. So if let's say I'm raising like $500,000, I'll do that until I get to maybe my first $250,000 of commitments. So about 50%. And then I go lazy mode, which was like, I'll send like a generic blurb to all these like people. I'm not going to customize it anymore, but I'll say like, hey, Hung, do you mind forwarding this over to Janelle? I think this could be interesting. By the way, like in the last 6 weeks, we've already like gotten 50% of commits, and this thing is moving fast. Thanks. Right. And then I just forward that to like all my remaining. And I find that kind of momentum storytelling really does work, because people love being, maybe they don't love, but they are susceptible to being FOMO'd by things like this. And speed of your fundraise is one of those things. this is an important part, I think, moment to also pause about speed. So if your fundraise is hard, it doesn't seem to be going well, or it's going too slowly, I just want to remind you of a very important truth. It's maybe my truth, but I actually think this is real, which is the quality of your fundraise, the speed of your fundraise doesn't necessarily correlate in any way or fashion to the quality of your business or your ability to be an excellent founder. A lot of great companies become great because they're both contrarian and right. It's like the Warren Buffett rule. So in the early days, this is actually one of the biggest risk, perceived risk, which is like you're trying to do something that is totally non-obvious here. And it might be super difficult to raise capital because VC and investors are kind of lagging indicators. They're not really that smart, just generally. I mean, yes, we like to tweet about the future and all that stuff, but in general, I'm not that impressed by most people in this industry. Like where they follow momentum quite a bit. So I just wanted to share a little bit of that side encouragement too, which is like, if this feels much slower and harder than it really is meant to be, that's okay. Just stick with it and, try to grit through because, it actually might be a signal, if anything, that you're working on something contrarian and right. I'll give you a really quick side story here. I know there's a lot of questions, which is I was a really early investor in Webflow. Currently, it's a no-code solution worth $2.3 billion. And I was at the seed stage. I wrote a small check, and I just recently learned, literally this year, that if I hadn't written that check, there was a real chance that team was thinking about giving up because like they were having such a tough fundraise, and it was just a really, really difficult process for them. But they grit through, and it's definitely not me taking credit because I didn't do shit besides like write a small check. And they actually did the real work and innovated and figured it out. But difficult for them. And now it seems like totally obvious that they were going to be successful. All right, I'm going to stop ranting here. Janelle, do we have some more questions?
Yeah, thanks, Eric, for sharing that story too. I think people will find that inspirational. Let's talk a little bit more about the cycle of fundraising and speed. So you shared this simple CRM.
Yeah.
When would you say from the start of, okay, so let's say everyone gets this template from us tomorrow and they start filling it out, what does the timeline look like before they could technically be ready to start their raise?
Very good. So we actually didn't even talk about some of the other assets that you're going to need to pull off a successful fundraise. So the investor list is first and foremost the most important. So if you're trying to if you can get between like 50 and 100 contacts on there, for especially the earlier that you are, I think that's actually a really good number to work from. It's a lot, but it's also, I think, something on the order of what we see in reality. So that's one, which is a CRM, filling this out, getting all the list of contacts, emails, and then the refers figured out. That's where I spend most of my time in the beginning. The other asset, there's like three more that I can think of, is actually the forwardable blurb. We've actually talked about this in past sessions at Hustle Fund, and you can actually review those sessions on our YouTube channel, search for Hustle Fund. And this is the forwardable blurb that your referrer can send in less than 2 seconds to the person whom you're trying to contact. And generally, a good forwardable blurb is, well, let me sort of share it like this, which is like, think of this all like dating. When I was like new to dating, my dad gave me this amazing advice. He said, like, Eric, speak only of pleasantries on your first date. Right? That's what he said. Right. And it gave me no other context besides that. I was like, the fuck does that even mean, Dad? Right. Like, but like, I actually figured it out later. So like the idea behind that is like, don't talk about your aunt who has like a mental health problem right now, or like your chronic health issues. Right? Like that stuff is unsexy. Talk about like the good parts of your business. So think of this as like progressive discovery. The blurb should share maybe 2 or 3 very, very interesting, notable aspects of your business. It's not meant to be comprehensive. It's meant to be relatively short. Then there's like a teaser deck, which is like the second asset, or the third asset. So we got the investor list, the blurb. A teaser deck is usually just a very, very small 5-slide version of your full deck that highlights your team, the problem, solution, market, and traction. It doesn't have to be this wonderfully clean narrative. It's just team, problem, solution, market, and traction to give people like a good taste that like, okay, this seems like a team that's serious, that's working on like a really interesting problem. And then finally, there's the full deck, whatever number of slides it's going to take. Where it's meant that to be like the voiceover, like when you're pitching in person or on Zoom, you can go through this, or it could be like the asset that you share after your pitch, where it could be like this awesome reference that your investors can share around with each other and discuss to make their decision. So more and more information is revealed with each progressive discovery stage. And the idea is then like, at that point, the investors are armed with what they need and can make the decision to invest or not to invest at that point. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. And we've still got so many more, so I should jump into the next one. A lot of people are appreciating the fact that you're using something as simple as a spreadsheet for your CRM, but there have been some questions about automating emails, automating the send of those blurbs. There's also a lot of chat about ghosting and how to keep reaching out until they say, no, please stop. So can you talk a little bit about the need for using something that's a little more official where you can automate the emails that you're using for out?
Yeah, that's a great point. So I generally don't really think that over engineering your CRM for those kinds of outreaches is too important at this stage, because we're generally talking about a discrete number of outreaches. Again, it's like 50 to 100 people, let's say, for like a given raise. And that's like small enough where like you can get an Airtable or a Google Sheet to happen. Here's like one of the things that I often find is like paralyzing. It's just like, you're introducing too much. It's just like, wait, I got to buy a CRM, and then wait, I got to set it up, and like, wait, I got to learn like how these stages work, and wait, I got to like learn how to do these like automated emails. It's like, no, like, I mean, like that stuff is awesome if you can do it. And if you actually have that background, having used CRMs, I think do it. Right. But like, but let's just kind of remove all that stuff and just like start with like a spreadsheet and then just emails and just work from here. It's going to be a little bit janky, but it's going to get the job done 95% of the time. Now, here's some areas where automation does help. This is what I do. So I use Superhuman, which is an email client. You don't need to use Superhuman. You can also use Gmail for this. Just set up the templates in advance that you'll need to accomplish this fundraise. And here are the templates I've created. One is a forwardable blurb, right? It's just like something that says like, hey, name, like, thanks so much for like offering to like connect us to your contact. It's like, here's a forwardable blurb below. It's basically that. I might modify a little bit, but that's one template. Another template that I create is the follow-up. This is actually very important. We talked about this in previous sessions as well, which is I am a big believer of this parlor trick that I swear gets noticed and differentiates you, which is within 1 minute of hanging up after your full pitch, immediately send a follow-up email that includes all of your materials. And that is a template that I have on Superhuman as well, which is just like, hey, name, thank you so much for your time just now. I'm really glad that we could share introductions. Just to give you some full context, we're currently raising this blah, blah, blah. And then like, here's some materials that can help you as you consider investing, the full deck. In our case, we have a data room at Hustle Fund. You probably don't need that at the earliest stages. Maybe there's some articles about you or like the market that's relevant. And then you say at the very end, like, I'll reach out to you in the next few days after you had a chance to process this. And then you just keep hitting them up and updating your CRM with the next contact to know that you're supposed to be reaching out to them. So those are like the key follow-ups the key templates that I've automated, and it works just fine. We do actually have a CRM at Hustle Fund when we do our fundraise. We use Pipedrive, and it's pretty good, but I've just never really bothered to learn it. I tend to find that I can get all the benefits of just pretty much just using email and sending my outreaches through there. But it is integrated with Pipedrive, so at least all of our team emails can be synced. So we can see all the contacts we've had for our investor, Janelle, right, as a team, and things like that. And we do a little bit of note taking in our CRM as well, but that's about it. I mean, it's not terribly different from the workflow that we're suggesting here with this simple Google Sheet, which hopefully many of y'all can copy and use yourself. All right. Any other questions, Janelle?
Yes. Let's talk about, okay, two themes that you have mentioned already. This war of attrition, right?
Yeah.
And then wait, what is it that Urkel says?
Oh, I'm wearing you down.
Wearing you
Yeah.
down. So war of attrition and wearing you down. So let's say you've gotten a soft commit from an investor, but then they kind of ghost you. Is this, do you have a specific strategy to handle that sort of situation? So you've had all these interactions, you're getting a soft commit, and then
Yeah.
crickets.
Sure. So I take actually, I'll share sort of two approaches here. It's one that I use, and there's an approach that my wife uses, and which is also fascinating too. So let me explain my approach, which is okay. First, I'll say that ghosting, I start to get a little bit more empathy for. It's terrible practice, but I sort of understand it now. At Hustle Fund, we review 700 deals a month. So it's a lot. And I kind of understand, like, if you don't have a system in place, like why people are so bad at follow up. It may not be because they're not interested. It's just like they're completely overwhelmed. By the way, at Hustle Fund, we're really committed to make sure that we reach out to every single one of you. But there are periods of time which are a little bit slower than others. So I get it. Now, when it comes to my rule of ghosting, which is it's not no until they explicitly say no, I really do believe that there comes a point where persistence starts getting noticed too, right? So it doesn't, like, the chances are that if people ghost you, you're never going to hear back from them ever again. But I do still think that, like, you can win on increments on, like, the person that you just follow up with, and they will eventually reach out and just say, like, wow, like, some small subset, like, this is, you really, really want this, huh? There's one person that in our first fund I reached out to 13 times, and then on the 13th time they actually committed a pretty large check into our fund. So it does work, and it's actually very little work too. And this is actually where automation from the previous comment could be good. I mean, like, you could set it up to, like, automatically reach out to this person every time, but I take a little bit more of a personal approach. I usually will just write, like, a single sentence, like, hey, hopefully the fall in New York is going well. By the way, do you have any thoughts or questions? That's kind of like the extent. It's just one sentence. That's my style. Now, my wife's style is actually really interesting. So she does a lot of large sales for her business too. She runs her own company. And she has adopted a very aggressive style of dealing with ghosting, which works really well. She'll just say, like, at a certain point after a couple of outreaches, like, hey, I just need to share some, like, honest feedback with you. Like, I thought that we had really good rapport, but you don't seem to, you haven't been responding to my last messages, and I kind of find that disappointing, right? She'll just say that she's disappointed in that person, okay, for being, like, poor etiquette here. She's never had negative pushback for that, and the conversion rates for that are actually quite high. People don't like to disappoint other people, right? But it takes a lot of guts to actually just write that in an email. But she does it very, very well. So I've been sort of thinking about that a little bit too, just like, hey, like, just want to give you feedback. Like, I'm kind of disappointed. I thought that we had really good rapport and you have a great reputation, but I just haven't really been seeing it, and I just want to share that with you, right? Fuck, that cuts right through the heart. Amazing, right? Yeah. Ow.
Yeah, but perhaps the fact that she opened up with saying, I thought we had good rapport, goes a long way to delivering. But
also adding the second part too, Janelle, which is like, sorry to cut you off, which is like, and you have such a strong reputation too, right? Ooh. Sorry, go ahead, please, Janelle.
It's a 1, 2, 3 punch.
Yeah, it's like boom, boom, boom.
That's impressive. Okay, and then going back to your story of the 13 contacts, the 13 outreaches before they came back and wrote the check for Fund 1. What was the interval of time between each of those emails?
Yeah, so I experimented with this, and we didn't actually talk about this, or I didn't even try to build this into the model, but it's a great question. So usually the first 3 outreaches, I'll ping you every 2 days. Okay. And then, like, the next, like, 3 or 4 or 5 outreaches, I'll ping you once a week. And then after that, I'll just ping you monthly forever. Now it's a little bit different because for a fund, a VC fund, with angel investors, you can't quite do that in the same way, perhaps, because there comes a point maybe, or like a VC fund, there comes a point where like it's out of stage. Like if you're reaching out to someone a VC fund that's only focusing on like pre-seed stage investments, it doesn't necessarily make sense to reach out to them 4 years later about like, we're doing our Series C now. Like that's like really out of stage, and they've kind of missed it at that point. But like the seed stage, like that could be like a full year where there could be like a real like window where that investor could be investing. As a VC fund, though, it's very different because we create a fund, and then like 3 years later we create another fund. 3 years later we create another fund. Like there isn't necessarily like something that where we fall out of stage at that point. So keeping them keeping them warm in our newsletters and things like that is something that we just do on an ongoing basis. But yeah, every few days in the beginning, maybe a weekly after that for a couple more times, and then perhaps put them onto like a monthly newsletter or something so that they can be passively following along thereafter.
You're a mind reader. That was my next question about using the newsletter to continue outreach. And would you need to, okay, so let's say it's been 4 years and so that particular fund or investor is no longer stage appropriate. Would you still just leave them on your newsletter, or do you go and cull your list occasionally?
Yeah, I generally don't pull anyone off our newsletter in this kind of a world. And the reason why is, you never know whether that investor can help you in other ways too. So let's say that, Janelle's ghosting me. She would never do that because she's like the most responsive person in the world. I can guarantee you that. But like let's say evil Janelle is ghosting me, right? And she misses, and like our company is rocket shipping. You might find that help can come in really odd ways. Right. Which is just like, years later, she just comes out of the blue and says like, hey, this sort of happened to us before too at Hustle Fund, which is like, hey, like I realized like I never was that good about following up with you. So my apologies, but I've been appreciating those updates. And it turns out that like I'm best friends with like Masa at SoftBank. Right. Like, and I think like he would really be interested in like understanding this $100 million round that you're putting together. It's really sometimes like just being having them in your orbit can lead to really cool, unexpected outcomes like that. And like, again, like the trick here that I found in those kinds of situations, when someone reaches out like that, is just being really thankful and kind, right? Just like, I don't like go back and accuse them like, where were you? You missed this out. Ha ha ha. Like that's always tempting to do, but like, the better response is just like, hey, like, I just really appreciate that you've been following our journey. It's like too bad that like we couldn't find fit earlier, but I'm just like super grateful that you're thinking about us and are willing to do something like this. It's just like my favorite martial arts is jujitsu, right? It's like you take like your own weaknesses or perceived weaknesses and turn them into like an assault back. But like in this case, we like it's charm offensive. Right. It's just like you could take one path of just like, yeah, you missed and be an asshole. Or the other approach is just be like nothing but grateful. Right. It's like, and then that will potentially turn that person into agent on your behalf too, to introduce you not just to SoftBank, but also Tiger Global and Insight Partners and all these others that are marking up portfolios like mad these days. Okay. I got a little ranty there. All my responses a little bit ranty. I'm in a ranty mood this Monday, Janelle. No.
Mondays are a good morning for webinars, it looks like then.
It's just like I drank all the coffee too, right?
Let's go back to the CRM for a moment. You talked a lot about personalizing your outreach. Can you touch on how you would include that information in your CRM? Like where in the CRM are you keeping this info, the personal info, organized on whether they're interested in, dolphins or whatever?
Great. Let's do a little exercise here. Okay. I love that question. So we're going to go with Hippo Angel. So we'll go like this, right? So 10, now it's 10, 27, 21. Great conversation with Hippo Angel. Learned that she is a member of the royal family in Wales and loves building robot airplanes on the side, has 2 dogs. Like, this is the kind of stuff that's like freaking gold. I mean, like, I am actually a really big believer that you need to have these kinds of details. And this is something that I generally study before each call too, which is just, what can we do to, well, like, can I mention like the 2 dogs from our last conversation or so forth? Like, a very common one I'll just share with you. And it's actually like something that I'm just interested in as a dad too, is like, I always ask if someone's like sort of lightly beginning to talk about family, whether they have a family, because I like to know like how old their kids are. Like, oh, you have like an 8-year-old daughter or something like that. That's so cool. And then we reach out like 6 months later. It's like, how's your daughter doing? Is she like in 3rd grade? Like any sports she's in? And it just adds a little bit more of a personal touch. And I'm also just like genuinely interested in understanding how parents are like living these days, because I'm trying to figure out how to do that myself. So yeah, all that stuff should be in here. My notes are generally like for each, I very much simplified this stuff, but usually I have like 20 bullet points of things that like come up in the conversation. And I love the personal details, So if it's like, this is where people who are like really good at sales, which it seems like a lot of people in chat are, like, becomes really handy. It's just like, I noticed that like Janelle's really into fly fishing in like Eastern Oregon or something like that. It's just like, if I hear something that's happening there, like a fly fishing competition in Eastern Oregon, I'd be like, hey, like, forward this. Like, have you heard about this? That might be included in one of their outreaches I have, right? Which is like, instead of saying like any thoughts and questions, like say, hey, Janelle, it's been a while. Any thoughts and questions on our materials and participating as an investor? By the way, I heard about this fly fishing competition in Eastern Oregon this weekend. You may want to check it out. I remember you like this stuff. Simple things like that.
Do they have fly fishing competitions? They must. Okay, so you've used the CRM, you've lined up the 50 to 100, you're ready to press go on the raise. Timing, and there have been a few questions asking about the November to December timeframe in particular.
Okay. Fantastic question. Thank you to whomever has raised that, or the set of you who did raise that. So I'm going to go with a couple ways to answer this thing. Let's sort of just do a really quick recap of how I like to coach people on their fundraise. Okay. I like to think of things as a fortnight. And I'm not talking about the video game, I'm talking about the old English definition of fortnight, which is 2 weeks, right? Like Wimbledon, fortnight, all that stuff. Anyway, so the idea is this: get your list in order, all of your materials, and on the Thursday before the fundraising begins, have everyone drop their introduction at the same time, Thursday night. Okay, so you're hitting up all 70 or whatever of your investors all at the same time on Thursday night. You're going to get a bunch of opt-ins from people saying, yes, I'd love to talk to Janelle, right? On Friday and Saturday, you ghost them. It's your turn. You don't say a damn thing to these people, okay? The reason why is on Sunday, you want to see who's opted in. Hopefully it's like 30, 40 people at this point. And then you're going to set up your investor schedule by priority of tiers. Like, there's gonna be tier 1 investors, tier 2 investors, tier 3 investors. The tier 3s are the worst, tier 1s are the best, right? So week 1, between Monday and Wednesday, you schedule all of your tier 2s, as many as you can at least. Try to get some reps in. Like, these are the people that are very strong, nice to haves, but you want to practice a little bit. Wednesday through Friday, the first week, you then put your tier 1s in there, the hustle funds, right? Of just like, like the very best pitch is ready, but it's still early in the process. That weekend between week 1 and week 2, Saturday and Sunday, you cannot leave your house. Ideally, you might even go to New York or San Francisco or wherever there's like a high locus of people that you're trying to reach out to who are in flight with conversation, and make yourself available to take a walk or go do breakfast or whatever, right? Now week 2 happens, all right? So any remaining tier 1 and tier 2 conversations, fit them in as quickly as possible on Monday and Tuesday. And then from Wednesday on, you just get to the dog shit, the tier 3s, right? Just like the people who are just like, whatever, right? I just like having them in process as a stalking horse. And then hopefully by that second Friday, the people whom you reached out to in the first week will have enough time to think about like, okay, we're in, let's do this, right? And then term sheets drop on Friday. In the case of early fundraisers, it might be just safe, so don't worry about term sheets. So that's the way that I like to think about these processes. Like, can you condense this all into 2 weeks? Can you fit in 5 to 10 conversations every day? and it's possible on Zoom. All right, it's gonna be tough, but you can do this. All right. Now, now to answer your question, like there's a time to do this and a time not to do this. The worst times of the year, generally like late July to like August, middle of August. A lot of VCs have families and things like that didn't want to take vacations. Some of the more insufferable ones will charter a cruise in the Mediterranean to Ibiza or whatever it is, or I've never been to these places. And then they're just like on no judgment, by the way, people who like those places. That sounds fun too, actually. So the late summer, I think, is kind of rough from like a period of time, but deals have gotten done this summer and last summer too, around that period of time. The really tough period is November 15 through January 5, let's call it. So in the US, we have Thanksgiving holiday, a little bit of breathing back in early December, and then like all the holidays in December, right, that are taking place. And it's gonna be just really tough. And I think this year in particular, people are just gonna want their holidays because we haven't been hugging our families and friends. So I'd say that like the best windows early in the Q1, Q2 of next year is gonna be great. But just avoid those windows. And then I also think that September and October is generally okay, but we're actually entering the period where it's going to get a little bit tough. If you've not started your process now, either start it immediately to get your first conversations in before Thanksgiving in the United States, or possibly wait until next year.
So it sounds like it could be a good time to start up your monthly updates that you send out to friends, supporters, etc., and be filling in your list of people to reach out to when the new year rolls around.
Perfect, Janelle. You're right. Which is, check out our video on fundraising via your newsletter on our Hustle Fund YouTube. Just watch the first 20 minutes of it. It'll just give you the principles how to do this. But yeah, Janelle's perfectly right. If you have some people that are kind of in flight, but not ready to have conversations with, and there's a way to just ask them to join your newsletter, you can drip campaign them a couple months worth of content before you're ready to go out and do your raise in January.
Warm them up.
Maybe we have time for one more, Janelle.
Okay. All right.
Quick one.
So let's see. Final question. If you had to pick your best source of where people should be looking for early stage investors, where would you send them?
Yeah. Again, like the definition of an investor is pretty broad here, right? It could be your dentist, anyone who's accredited, but I really like tools like NFX Signal. I think they make a pretty nice searchable database. Crunchbase is okay. AngelList is okay. But the best source is other founder friends, I tend to find. Those who've been in the game can help you to really vet those. And those warm introductions, by the way, are the strongest you can have, even more so than from an investor like me. Investors really, really, really appreciate when founders are sending them some really good leads. So try to work through that as well. And with that, Janelle, I think we got to kind of wrap up here. So thank you so much for moderating all these amazing questions that came our way here. And I want to go back and sharing our screen bit. So a reminder that you can go to YouTube, check out Hustle Fund, and you can see a bunch of videos of stuff that we sort of referenced in today's call. And a big, big final shout out to our partners at GS Futures who have allowed us to make this session happen today. Go to gsfutures.vc. They're actively investing in some of my favorite people that I like to work with. Janelle and I just had lunch with Tay, the managing director, last week, and he's the best human being ever. And finally, thank you all so much for your time. You guys are all super busy out there, hustling super hard, and it means a lot that you spend some of your morning or afternoon with us. So all the best to you all, and hopefully we will see you in a session next month when we host our next one. Take care, team.